Welcome to Job Search Do's and Don'ts, sponsored by the new ABA Legal Career Central. Moderating the program today is Liz Stone. Liz is the Managing Director of the Dubin Group, a legal search firm based in the Bay Area, hired by firms and companies for placement services. She regularly advises on the legal market and career strategy. Liz, you may proceed with the program.
Thank you so much, and welcome everyone. Joining me today on the program, we have Dan Binstock and Stephanie Esenwa. Dan is a partner at Garrison Sisson, a DC-based attorney search firm. Dan focuses on traditional attorney recruiting and consulting on lateral hiring strategies. Prior to becoming a legal recruiter in 2004, Dan practiced IP law at a national boutique firm. Stephanie is a professional development specialist. She's a certified 5 O'Clock Club career coach and founder of Sisson LLC, where she advises women in their career journey through an individual career coaching and group presentations. Stephanie has worked at a corporate law firm, as an attorney, in a social justice nonprofit, and in higher education administration. You can see our program agenda today. We're going to cover top issues for the job search do's and don'ts. We'll have some tips on the topic. We'll be taking your questions. We will have some points that we agree and disagree on, and there'll be some takeaways, and you can follow along with the slides. So I'd like to start with, here we go, our top issues. And we're going to cover today preparing for your search, networking properly, resume tips, interviewing well, and more. So I'd like to start where it makes the most sense, preparing for your job search and your search strategy. So Stephanie, I want to ask you, where would you recommend you start someone focus their job search, assuming, if they know they want to do something different or get a new job, where should they start?
I recommend going through some self-assessment exercises, which is the first step in developing personal marketability and a solid career plan. We have included 2 self-assessment exercises from the 5 O'Clock Club in the materials for the participants today to start the self-assessment process. A career coach can also be helpful with analyzing the self-assessment results to help to uncover key accomplishments, short and long-term goals, as well as proper positioning and job targeting, which is all helpful in starting the search.
Great. So once someone knows what kind of job they want to find, let's talk about how they go find those jobs. Stephanie, would you recommend relying on job postings when someone knows what direction they want to go?
No, you should not rely solely on online postings, which represent only about 20% of the available jobs. The other 80% are part of what's known as the hidden job market, which you need to uncover in your job search. One way to do that is to gain advocates in your search. When I personally was in a career transition, a woman I'd met for an informational interview actually became one of my advocates and sent me a job posting before it was made public.
Great. Dan, do you have anything to add on job postings and what Stephanie talked about with the hidden job market?
Sure. I absolutely agree that if you're the time that it takes for an employer to post a position, whether that's looking at the government or at another law firm or an in-house position, there's usually at least a several week till sometimes several month period where the need is starting to grow and arise, and there is a soft need, but it maybe hasn't been formally approved. If it's through the government, it hasn't gone through all the approval processes, or even with a corporation or a law firm. So that a lot of times people will get a foot in the door at an employer before a job becomes actively posted. So if you're applying only when the job is posted, you are competing with a lot of other people when sometimes jobs are filled before a position is ever actually posted live. And so that's the best of situations if you can get something right before it's posted.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I've seen a lot of people, and I'll include my husband in that, who's a practicing attorney. He got his dream job to go in-house just through some networking, and someone knew he was looking. The company wasn't even sure they wanted to hire a lawyer, but they brought him in to talk to them, and it was such a fit that they decided to create a position for him. So definitely there are great jobs in the hidden job market. Dan, what are your thoughts on a recruiter? A lot of people come to me looking to see if I can help them. Do you think that people should plan on going through a recruiter to find a new job?
Sure. Well, it's a great question, and I will provide a couple of different perspectives on it. I think what most people don't understand, and I think, Liz, you can corroborate this as well, is that if you think about all of the attorneys in the country, I would say less than 5% or 5 to 10% are appropriate for using a recruiter. The reason why is it's about supply and demand, and recruiters will work with only those people that are in demand by their clients. And so the types of clients that recruiters tend to work for are law firms, either AmLaw 100 or AmLaw 200 law firms, or smaller high-end specialty boutiques, or corporations. It's very rare that a recruiter will work with the government. So if you're looking for something in the public sector, you're not going to use a recruiter. Or if you don't have experience coming from another larger law firm or AmLaw 100 or 200 type of firm, or a corporation that has an established legal department, it may not be appropriate to use a recruiter because you will have a better chance if you apply directly on your own. So there are a lot of attorneys that are very good in the United States, but they just are working maybe at a very regional, local firm with 5 or 10 people, or coming from a particular local government. And if they're looking to get into a larger law firm or another law firm, odds are some of the firms that might be interested in their experience, or other types of companies or government agencies, aren't going to be the types that use recruiters. So I think there's sometimes a default response that people have is, I'm having trouble getting a job, I need to use a recruiter, when that isn't always the case. That's kind of a high-end overview of that. I think if you're a partner and you're looking to make a move from one law firm to another, and you do have some sort of portable practice or a very good business plan, and your practice has maybe at least $500,000. Sometimes in certain markets it can be $300,000-$400,000 in portable business. You may have a chance of getting something. The other thing
I'm gonna jump in here just to let you know how much I agree, because I always say there's very few people out there that I'm actually able to help, and I always recommend networking for everyone. I think it's one of the most important parts of the job search, and based on everything you guys have said, it sounds like you agree. So I do want to turn and talk about networking, since I think it's such an important part of this search. So Dan, I want to pick up with you since we were just talking. What advice do you have for people who want to start networking to find their next job?
Sure. If somebody is in a position where they don't yet have prior experience, or they're coming out of law school and they're newer and they're sort of hoping that someone's going to give them a chance, I think the best thing to do is ask people for help or advice, as opposed to asking people if they're hiring. I heard a quote once that said, when you look for a job, you get advice, but when you seek advice, you are more likely to get a job. And I do think that that's relevant. And also, some people, I feel, make a mistake of trying to bite off too much time. When they're networking, I will sometimes get calls from people that will say, can I go to lunch with you, or can we spend an hour having coffee, where when we're all very busy, an hour or even a half hour seems like a lot of time, and it will sometimes be blown off inadvertently. So I think it's better for people, if you ask for smaller amounts of time, you're more likely to get a discussion. So start with 5 or 10 minutes. If you send someone an email and follow up, just say, I was hoping you might be able to provide me a little bit of help, and I was wondering if you're available for 5 or 10 minutes for a quick phone call. I tend to respond best to that type of outreach.
Yeah, that sounds great. Stephanie, do you have any thoughts on informational interviews in the networking process?
Sure. When you are transitioning to a new field especially, it is important to use your informational interviews to become an insider. By doing so, you can basically learn the key players, the language, the issues in the new field, and also start to build relationships as you are growing a network. You should also keep in mind that you're building your reputation within the new field, so your follow-up is very important. Always be sure to send a thank you to someone who has given you their time, and continue to keep in touch periodically to maintain the contact and keep them updated.
And one question I get about just general thank yous, both for interviews and networking, is whether it's necessary to write a handwritten note or an email. I always feel like an email is fine. I don't know if you guys have any different opinions on that, but I think people appreciate a quick email, and there's not a need for a handwritten note.
I agree. When you're talking about an informational interview, it is okay to follow up with an email, especially if you've been communicating with that person by email. I guess you just want to make sure that if you've been communicating with someone maybe by phone, you want to make sure that your email doesn't go into their junk mail. Yeah.
And then in terms of the networking process, one thing that I always recommend people do, first I recommend starting with people you know and reaching out to them and asking them about the work that they do, how they got where they are, any recommendations they have. And I also think it's always good to see if they can introduce you to anyone else in the field. So whether you're getting into a new field or just looking for a new job, asking for an additional introduction is great, because then you're going to be put in touch with more people that you don't know, but you're going to have that introduction, and it's more likely that they're going to talk to you. And then, of course, follow up all of that with the thank yous, and also be respectful if they're not able to introduce you to anyone. I mean, they're taking their time to talk to you, but I think it's definitely worth a polite ask to see if there are more introductions that can be made, and then you can continue your networking program. So I always think that's helpful. Now, once you have figured out what you're interested in, and you've focused your search, and you've begun networking, and networking, of course, will help prepare you for interviews, help you become an insider, and help you meet people in the field, open you up to the hidden job market, all of that. You still want to have your resume and cover letter in top shape. So, and if you're applying cold, your resume is especially important. So I think before you're even looking at content, just the formatting of resumes alone is important. And do you have any advice on formatting resumes?
Sure. A lot of times I will get resumes that have the employer's name and then a large paragraph that consists of 6, 7, or 8 sentences. And I believe that people tend to not read more than the headings or the first or second sentence, and then they've made a snap decision. So I'm a huge fan of using headings, and the rule should be that if you have more than 3 bullet points, and each bullet point should not be more than 1 sentence, you should probably create a new subheading. So I really like the use of bullets. I really like the use of subheadings, indenting, so that someone could get a sense of what you do by only looking at the headings and the subheadings and never having to read the bullets. And if your practice has, for example, you do, let's say you're, an insurance attorney, and half of your practice is or maybe a third of your practice is counseling and two-thirds of your practice is litigation, I think the best resumes will break that out in subheadings, and sometimes after the subheading, for example, litigation, you would put roughly two-thirds of practice, and under counseling you would put roughly one-third of practice. So I think it just helps people really understand what you do, and it communicates your ability to explain things in a very user-friendly manner.
Great. And so in addition to a resume, a cover letter is also an important, or can be an important part of the application process. Stephanie, what are your thoughts on preparing a cover letter?
So definitely do not list everything from your resume in the cover letter. Let the cover letter be part of the overall package, which already includes a resume. Be sure to find the right tone based on your research of the employer. And your cover letter should also include a pitch, which is properly positioning you for the job by stating your skills and your experience in a way that makes it easy for the employer to see you in that position.
Great.
Stephanie,
sorry.
I'd like to just add a footnote to that. Is sometimes people assume that they don't need to explain in a cover letter why they're looking for a new position. And a lot of times if people that are reviewing a resume will assume that you've been asked to leave, or they just, by virtue of having a lot of resumes, they need to make snap judgments, and oftentimes these snap judgments are incorrect. So if you're leaving or considering leaving a current employer voluntarily and you've received very good reviews and you're in good standing, I always think it's beneficial to put that in the cover letter, briefly saying I'm in very good standing, that my interest in considering a move is purely voluntary, and here's why I'm interested in your company, employer, agency, or wherever that falls in. So don't forget to highlight some of those positives instead of assuming that you'll be able to explain that on an interview, because sometimes you may not get that chance.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Dan. And now the tone of the cover letter is something else that's very important, because even if you're looking for a government position or a law firm position that might be similar but is in a different part of the country, for example, the Bay Area is more of a casual tone in general than New York, and a startup company is going to be much less formal than a law firm or the government. Stephanie, do you have any recommendations on how to work on the tone of your cover letter?
Sure. Well, first you definitely need to do the research, and part of that relates to what we were speaking about before, and going back to the informational interviews and learning the lingo. And also by virtue of practice. As you send some out, you're going to get a response. If you have developed a network of advocates, then they can help you critique, as well as people in the new area or in the new field.
Okay. And we've gotten a couple of good questions in that I'm going to touch on real quick, and we're going to keep taking questions along the way. One question about looking for a job, and this would be networking and submitting your resume if you don't want people to know that you're looking. And I get asked this question all the time. People call me and they're interested in finding another job, and then they are scared to apply to other places because it's within the field and they're worried about it getting back to them. And it is a concern, and confidentiality is an issue, but if you want to make a move, you do have to put yourself out there a bit. I think people are always very respectful of the fact that it's a sensitive issue and confidentiality is important. So if you are networking within your field or applying to another job, it's always okay to just let people know how important confidentiality is to you, that you really like your job, that you really don't want it to get back. And I think people understand that, and they don't want to be the person to say something they shouldn't. But it is something that if you want to make a move, you will just have to put yourself out there a bit. Dan and Stephanie, do you have any thoughts on that?
I do actually, in terms of the references. So one way to sort of work on that is to be protective of your references. You don't want 10 different jobs calling them at the same time, and you also want to be conscious of who you choose to be your reference and make sure that they are prepared ahead of time, and you maybe tell them what your pitch is and tell them exactly how you are positioning yourself for the job and what you want them to offer in your package. And in terms of the prospective employer, you want to make sure that you are not handing those out without knowing where you stand in the job search, in their job search. So so that you make sure they are not contacting your references unless you are very far along.
And Dan, do you have any thoughts about how to deal with confidentiality in the earlier stages if you're out networking?
Yeah, I agree. I think what you said is spot on. Just tell people, my employer does not know I'm looking. And if you send someone an email looking for a cup of coffee or a 5 or 10 minute conversation, depending on the relationship that you have with the person. Obviously, if you know the person, a cup of coffee is perfectly fine. In that situation, you can just remind them to say, as a reminder, my employer does not know that I'm considering a move right now, so I would appreciate you keeping this just between us. And usually 9.5 out of 10 times people are very, very good about that, if not more.
Yeah. So thank you, guys. I'd like to move on to talk about the next important part of your job search, which is interviewing. I know that my first advice that I give everyone very broadly is that when you are interviewing, it is your chance to learn about the future employer, and just because you go into interview doesn't mean you even know that you want that job or that you are planning on accepting the job. But what is important is to go into every interview like it is the only job you ever wanted. And whatever you need to do to prepare to be enthusiastic and express your interest is really important, because if you go into interview and you aren't acting like you really want this job and that it's the only job you ever wanted and you're the only candidate that would ever make sense for them, it's hard to get to the next stage to get more information and ultimately get to an offer. So that is my broad advice on interviewing, is definitely prepare to be enthusiastic about the position. Dan, I know you have some good thoughts on specifically showing companies why you are the right fit. What do you recommend for an interview? So,
yeah, my approach is sometimes people don't know going in whether they're going to be the right fit or not. And I found that sometimes people will come in and just right off the bat be like, this is the dream job for me. And someone will say, well, why are you so interested? And they'll say, I don't know, but I'm really excited about it. So I think that is always needs to be tempered a little bit with sort of a realistic view on how much do you know, and do you know enough information to be really enthusiastic about that. And so along those lines, I found that people that go in sort of wearing a consultant hat to try to understand what is keeping the interviewer up at night, and getting the interviewer to paint sort of a visual mental picture of that. For example, a great question is, where do you need the most help and support right now? Using the words help and support are really good ways to convey to the interviewer that you are looking out for sort of where they need the most help and support, obviously, but you're not just viewing this as something that's about you, but rather about them. So it's a interviewer-focused interview as opposed to the interviewee focusing on themselves. So also some good questions are, tell me about somebody who has worked out very well here. Why did they work out well? How about someone who didn't work out well? Why did they not work out well? What types of people fit best into this employer culturally, and also going back to where you need the most help and support. If you're a partner and you're looking to move from one law firm to another, understanding where the missed business opportunities might be from one firm to another. For example, if they're not getting enough support, they have a hole in their expertise and things like that. So I think starting with what is this? What is the point of view that the person who's interviewing coming at this from, and what's keeping them up at night, and how can you play a role in helping to meet their needs? And by doing that, you will get a lot of really good information, but at the same time also present yourself in a way that's not just focused on yourself, because at the end of the day, if you're not going to make the life easier of the interviewer, it's probably not going to work out.
And I just want to pop in for a minute just to be clear now that we've moved to official interview discussion. Earlier when we were talking about informational interviewing, that is when a candidate is exploring the job market and is networking, and it's almost like the candidate who's looking is out interviewing employed attorneys to find out about their position, to learn about the field, to find out how they can get into it. So when we refer to informational interviewing, we are not talking about an application for any particular job. We're talking about networking within the field so that you can meet people and learn more about the area. And what we're covering now is an official interview when a company or an employer has brought you in to interview for a specific position. So hopefully that clears up the two different discussion points we've had for some people. Now, Stephanie, I know you have some great advice on interviewing, and one thing that I also always recommend to people in interviews is to always ask questions. That is a way to show that you are interested in the position. And Stephanie, what is your advice on questions to ask?
Sure. One good question to ask in following up on what Dan mentioned about interviewing as a consultant is, what do you want to be able to say 1 year from now about the person who takes the job? That will let you know the goals that they have for the upcoming year and for the position requirements that may not have necessarily been listed beforehand. Definitely do not ask about salary in the interview, but do have an answer ready in case they ask you.
And I always recommend, preparing questions ahead of time, based on your research of the employer. You want to have questions ready, but then also asking questions based on any discussion points that have come up in the interview. Even if it's a small follow-up question, just what somebody might be working on is helpful because it shows that you are present and engaged in the current interview. And the other thing I tell people is it's always okay if you're meeting with multiple people in one day. You can always ask the same questions to different people. Just because one person answered all of your questions, you don't want to walk in and talk to the next person, and when they ask if you have any questions, you don't want to say, no, everything was covered, because then they think that you're not interested in what they had to say. So feel free to repeat questions to different people at the same company, even if it's on the same day. So,
Liz, can I mention one more thing? In terms of following up with it, when you have multiple people, you can always have a generic question that has a personal touch, maybe how they've enjoyed their experience or how they got to that particular position. Or through your research, you can have even a more personal, depending on what the field is, a more personal question related to maybe some research or some case specific to them.
Great. And now quickly, I want to touch just very quickly on the process of accepting or declining an offer, with a focus on declining an offer, because people do often come to me with that question. So when you receive an offer and you obviously have to think about it, Dan, what do you suggest people do when they first receive an offer?
Sure. So it's usually extended by phone or in person, and people like to give a personal touch when they're extending the offer because they want to get a sense of how you respond, if you're excited or if you're sort of lukewarm on it. a lot of people, if if you're going to accept it, obviously you are going to accept it and you want to review things. But what is more challenging for people is if you're interested, but there's somewhere else that you're interviewing and you don't want to risk offending the first employer that gave you the offer, but you also want to play things through with the second employer. I've found that there are two things you can do. One is if you get the offer right then and you think that you're going to accept, but you just don't want to accept on the spot, what you say is, "Thank you very much. I'm very flattered to receive this. I'm looking forward to receiving the paperwork and reviewing everything." So that eliminates your pressure to have to give a yes or no right there on the spot. However, if it's going to be another week or 2 weeks, don't. I tend to think honesty is always the best in these situations, because employers know that if you don't answer right away or you don't have immediate follow-up questions, they know that you're interviewing with other places. And I find that just telling people the truth, I've been interviewing at a couple places, I'm really excited about this offer, but I also want to play this out with one other place to make sure that I'm being very thorough in my job search, and this is an important move for me, and I want to make sure that wherever I go is going to be the next a very good long-term fit. So I'd like to probably have a few another week or two, if assuming that they will extend at that time. But just being honest that you're interviewing somewhere else and not kind of dropping off and going silent because you don't know the right thing to do, because employers are always going to assume, yes, this person is interviewing somewhere else, and they do really appreciate the honesty. And put yourself in their position, or when an employer would do the same thing with you if they were to tell you they were interviewing with someone else.
Yeah, definitely. It's always best to be honest and upfront with people. Stephanie, what do you recommend people think about doing after they receive an offer?
I recommend they ask any remaining hard questions. So you receive an offer, again, maybe hold off and thank them, set up another meeting, and ask those hard questions that you were not able to ask earlier. Use that time to negotiate using market support. And you can do that either for compensation, or if that's not a possibility, even for additional items like training.
I mean, I always feel like there's questions you want to ask in an interview, and that's all about the position and how you can help. And once you have the offer at hand, you have much more negotiating power. And you still want to be tactful and always ask questions that are reasonable, especially if you're negotiating. Go out and find what is happening out there in the market, so that you can come back and say, well, most people at this position have X amount of vacation or X base salary. But after you have the offer, you can continue to ask the hard questions. You can ask if you can push back your start date to get a couple of weeks off, those kinds of things. It's assuming you are still diplomatic and professional in your behavior. Employers are very used to people coming up with follow-up questions after they get an offer. So, but you still want to make sure that you show good behavior and negotiate in the way that they would, still make you would still appear to be someone that they really want to work with. So getting as much market information possible is good for that. So I am going to move to our quick tips right now before we move into some more topics, just to review what we've covered so far. With the job search, the first important step is determining your career interests, figuring out what you want to do next. And I always encourage people to look very broadly and seek out informational interviews, talk to people in the field to get information. As Stephanie discussed, talking to a career coach or taking a self-assessment to figure out what you want to do. And then put together your networking plan. And as we talked about, that includes reaching out to people, informational interviews, learning about the field, more about the field and how you can make a move, and asking for other introductions. And Simultaneously, you want to have your resume up to date. And we talked about specifics of resume formatting, and I also want to make sure everyone knows always tailor your resume for the specific job you're applying for. And that means you can have multiple working resumes, which is fine, especially if you're looking in a few different areas. So research the job that you're applying for and tailor your resume to that job and list out those skill sets you have that are very relevant, putting the most relevant information up the top. And when it comes to interviewing, we all recommend be a you-focused interviewee, not a me-focused interviewee. So really finding out how you can help that organization, understanding their needs, and coming in like a consultant would to show what you can bring to the position. So those are our quick tips on the topic, and I would like to take some audience questions now. One question that has come up a few times are just the specifics when you are looking to move locations. So if you are in New York and you're looking to move to the Midwest, how to go about your job search there. And I think the same advice we've been talking about for everything applies. And for me, I think networking is always the most important. And even if you're not available to meet with someone in person for coffee, you still have the opportunity to network. You can look up to see if there's any alumni from your school in the area and reach out to them. Sending an email is fine to see if they're available to talk. And I would recommend, if you don't know someone, you can give them a few weeks to respond and do a follow-up. But if you don't hear from them after that and you don't know them, then maybe let it go. But to keep reaching out to people. LinkedIn is a great tool to see how you're connected to people. So there are definitely ways to find people in a new geography and reach out to them. Dan and Stephanie, do you have any thoughts on any advice for moving to a new area?
Sure. Stephanie, do you want to go first? Or?
Sure. So one thing that I would recommend, sort of following up on what we've been talking about before, is having a strategy, having a networking plan. And part of that is researching all of the places that you could potentially see yourself working, making a list, and then having a campaign to try to find a contact within each of those companies, firms, or organizations, and figuring out exactly how many positions you are targeting. When you're aiming for something, let's say like 200 positions, you know that you have a broad enough search that you'll probably get something more quickly. And then making a contact plan. So whether you're going to do direct mailing, sending out letters, whether you're going to use email, whether you're going to do some sort of phone campaign, just basically having a strategy for reaching into your target market.
Great. What I was going to add is when you're reaching out, always mention why you're interested in the particular city. It's not enough to just say I'm interested in Los Angeles if you're coming from New York. I think it's best to say we're going to be moving to Los Angeles and here's why. We've got family here. Sort of explaining your connection to the city so that people don't assume that you're just doing a nationwide job search and it seems more targeted. The other thing is sometimes it can be hard to get traction when you're out of state because the employer may not want to fly you in or do anything like that. So if you're going to be visiting, let them know I'm going to be in town on this date and have availability on these times if you're able to speak or meet or something like that. So oftentimes when presented with dates and times, people are more likely to say yes, especially if they feel like you're going to be in town and it's a limited time. And if you're going to be interviewing with other places, also let them know that you're going to be interviewing with other places in that city, so it does create a little bit more of a sense of, oh wow, well this is someone that we may not want to lose, so let's move on this more quickly. So those are a couple strategies.
Definitely. We are going to take some more questions. We are getting so many good questions in. If we don't have time to cover all of them, we will be answering more on our website, so there will be some follow-up on that. I'm going to move now to, we have a few points for agree and disagree, and actually this ties into some questions we've gotten. A lot of people have something they maybe need to overcome in their background, and for lack of a better word, we'll call it a negative point. You might have a large gap on your resume. You may not have been at your job for very long, but you're looking to move. There may just be some things that you need to explain. Dan, how do you feel about the statement, offer up any negative points up front so you can address them head on?
I generally agree. I think there's always the exceptions where sometimes providing too much information out front can look like a lack of judgment. But I do think that what makes a lawyer is your ability to be able to overcome and explain difficult facts in a way that's thorough, accurate, and compelling. So I do believe that when people have a negative, they hope that sometimes they can just avoid it and it's not going to come up. But I do think that the better way of approaching something is, like they say in litigation, start with the negatives, explain it, and move on. So I do think that with a job search, the better you're able to deal with negative facts, which everybody has, the better it demonstrates your lawyering abilities, and it also, if nothing else, it shows that you're an honest person that's trustworthy.
I agree. If there's something that shows up on paper before you've even met anyone, so if you have a very long gap on your resume or something that an employer would want to know, that you do address it up front in a very tactful way. I do get a lot of questions from people on a resume where they are so worried about something, and I live in the market and working with employers all the time, and I explain to them, this is not a big deal. You don't want to come in defensive about this. Sometimes people worry a bit too much about a point that is only going to be a big deal if they make it a big deal. So running your resume by people, and also where you're doing your informational interviews and talking to people in the field and getting advice ahead of time will be helpful in determining how much you bring up front. And I get the question a lot about whether people should address if they've been laid off. And I think that can vary. If you've been laid off and your firm still has you on the website and they want you up there for 3 more months, there might not be any need to mention it. If you are in a very bad economy and everybody knows that the government laid people off at a certain time, you don't want to try to pretend if it's very clear on paper what happened. But to the extent you can follow up and say, I was laid off due to economic reasons and I can provide these 3 references from people I worked for, that's always helpful to turn it into something positive. So I think, it is good to have judgment on this, but if there's something glaring, it is good to offer it up front.
I'm sorry, Liz, I've got one question about so not mentioning that you've been laid off right out of the gate. However, if someone's on a website and someone asks them, have you been laid off? I know that that's not the question, that you weren't addressing that, but I do think sometimes I imagine people may be wondering, what do you do if you've been asked to leave, but the firm said, that you should continue to present yourself as if you're still working. What are some of your thoughts on that? I'm happy to share as well, but I think that's kind of a trickier question, but a good one.
It is. And that's when I think it comes down to something individually. If the firm has asked you not to say you were laid off and that it was for economic reasons and you've signed a non-disclosure agreement, I would just probably give that request priority, and they're going to serve as a reference. Whereas if there's a mass layoff, and for example, I have a lot of people whose were a corporate associate and their job abruptly ended in January of 2009 when law firms laid people off en masse. I don't like when people pretend that they weren't laid off in that situation. So I do think it depends, and it also depends what your former employer has talked to you about and how they want to help you deal with it.
Yeah, and also knowing what – I'm sorry, go on.
Oh, no, keep going. One last point on that.
I was going to say, yeah, the other thing is also realizing how small the market is, and if your firm is a direct competitor of the firm that you're interviewing at, odds are somebody knows somebody. And what we hope people don't find out, sometimes it's inadvertently going to be shared, whether it's now or at some point in the future. Some firms or even employers will ask in their due diligence, have you ever been asked to leave a prior employer? So you want to bear that in mind. I tend to err on the side of honesty is the best policy because it's going to come out at some point, but I agree with Liz that there are always different circumstances and you want to be sensitive, but it's kind of like stuffing a beach ball under the water. No matter how much you try to hide it, it's going to pop out at some point, and it's okay to have a negative, but it's worse to be perceived as having a negative and also not being honest during the interview. So just keep that in mind as well as another counterpoint for that.
Exactly. And moving on to our next point of discussion, Stephanie, you have recommended always including a summary resume, a summary header on your resume. Can you explain in further detail why you think that is important?
Sure. So this is important, especially in trying to make your resume stand out. So as we've mentioned, your resume is only going to get a brief review, and when you include a summary statement at the top, you're basically including all of the main points and leading the reader to how you want them to view you and view the rest of the resume. So the summary statement includes a title, which you can give yourself. You can give yourself a label. It doesn't have to be the one that is specifically your job title, because that may not describe what you're doing or the job that you want to be doing. So for example, you can label yourself as a healthcare attorney or a project manager, whatever it is that you want to be. And then your summary statement includes some of your accomplishments and unique skill set.
And I agree that in certain circumstances, a summary header can be helpful. However, I look at a ton of resumes coming in, and I often recommend people remove them for a couple of reasons. Sometimes I feel like the summary header is just repeating what's in the resume and then just makes it weaker. Sometimes I feel like the summary header doesn't match the skill set and the experience I see in the resume, and then that to me says this person is trying to turn themselves into a type of attorney that they're not, so they're not a fit for this position. And what I think is more effective if you're trying to switch practice areas or go into a whole new profession, then a summary header can be helpful, but what you also really want to make sure you do is really go through the content of your resume and pull out the work experience that shows why you are a good fit, why you have done X, Y, Z, and that is this skill set that the new position would need. Whereas sometimes I see summary headers that they're telling, not showing. They're just saying, I'm an action-oriented person that would be great in this field, and then the hard substance of the resume does not match up. So if you are going to use a summary header, make sure you don't use it as a way to just glide over the work that needs to be done in your resume. And if you have the 100% on-point experience, I think a summary header can be a bit of a distraction because that experience should come through in your resume. Dan, do you have any thoughts on a summary header?
Yeah, I tend to agree that when I see summary, I immediately think this is someone that's trying too hard to show what they've done, and if they did a good job with their resume in terms of using subheaders and headings, it would be pretty clear what they did and we wouldn't need the summary. I think please, please, please do not put, action-oriented, dedicated, team player type of stuff. I just think that looks so amateur for a legal resume. Again, that's just my personal bias. And also the objective, I do not like them. I think it, again, looks very amateur to say, objective to secure a position in a team-oriented environment where I can further apply my skill sets and make a difference. It's just like, ugh, come on.
Yeah.
So that's my bias on that, is it's not very strong in the legal world.
And I think that this touches on a point we've hit on all along, which is how important your preliminary research is on a position or an area of work, because different areas, different types of organizations, different places are all going to have a different opinion on this. And Dan and I work more in a focused law firm environment that does not want to see this. So all of these things, your resume, your cover letter, all of that, the more information you can get from people or have people look at it before you submit it for a job, the stronger your resume is going to be for the particular area that you're applying for. So you can see that, 3 people working in the legal field all have different opinions on these things. And what's important for you if you're applying for a job is to present something that is a fit with the employer that you're interested in. So I think doing your research is an important part of all of this. I am going to take a few more questions. I've had a number of questions that, again, we touched on moving to a different area, and also people looking to get back into the job market, career change, how to make those kinds of moves. So if you're looking for something, or especially you've been out of the game for a long time, one networking tip that I think is really important is to find an organization to join, but not just join the organization and go to a happy hour and let people know that you are looking. I don't think that gets you very far. But joining a committee and volunteering to be on a committee. If you've been out of the workforce for a while and you're looking to meet people in the area you're interested in, and you're hoping to network your way into a job, volunteering on a committee is a great thing to do, because then people can actually see your work product. They can see that you're reliable. I think they get to know you more in person, and they would feel more comfortable letting you know about jobs they hear about or recommending you to someone else. Dan and Stephanie, do you have any other tips about making a big type of move or getting back into the workforce after some time off?
One tip that I have is to just increase your education. So obviously you're not going to go back to school, but use CLEs to learn something new, maybe a new type of law that you weren't practicing before, and also to seek out pro bono work. That's sort of a win-win for the organization that is looking for attorneys, and also is an opportunity for you to network and do all of those things that you can do volunteering on a committee, but do that for a specific organization. It's also something that you can include on your resume. Your resume does not have to distinguish paid and unpaid experience. Your resume just lists experience. So you can list the organization that you're working for, even on a pro bono basis, build up a network, have references, do all of those things, all while helping a cause.
Great. Dan, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I agree. I think just the more you get out, the more you meet people, sometimes you get opportunities in the most unexpected ways. And sometimes if you're a job search is not easy. You're putting yourself in a position where you're vulnerable. You get a lot of rejection. And I think that just the mindset is, if you expect you're going to strike out 9 out of the 10 times, and you know that that's going to be the expected amount, some of these things are less painful to do in terms of going to events and pushing yourself to get off of the sidelines and really engage. But yeah, no, I do agree that the more you do, just increases that web and likelihood that something's going to happen, and you have to push through your discomfort. But I know that's probably a different topic.
Yeah. And one more question I want to hit on before we head to our takeaways is just some advice on getting your resume read. So, I always recommend the first step for getting your resume read for a position is to find a contact at that company, and LinkedIn can be really useful to see who could provide introductions so that you can pass your resume on to a person at the employer. But that is not always possible. So if you submit to an application that you see online, or you're sending out your resumes cold to companies for a posting that they have, to the extent your experience really that is listed in your resume really matches the job posting is very important. So some resumes are scanned by technology and they're looking for search words. So if there's a phrase in a job posting and you have that experience but you phrase it differently, rephrase it to use the words that are in the job posting, because that will jump out to either someone screening your resume or to technology. And I think that can be really helpful. It does also mean that you will, like I said, have multiple working copies of your resume. But to the extent you can get some, always accurately reflecting your experience, but to the extent you can get those exact words from a job posting in, that will help your resume get a first look. Dan and Stephanie, real quick, do you have anything to add on that?
I recommend, to the extent that you can find a contact or potential someone who you think may be able to get you to a contact, I recommend emailing and snail mail, sort of doubling up, and also sort of the debatable summary statement issue with that providing a roadmap, bold, italics, and underlining, basically directing the eye of the reader in your resume.
Great. And Dan, do you have anything else to add on that, or have we covered it?
You've covered it.
All right, great. So I am going to move to our takeaways, some highlights from our summary today. And let's see here. Stephanie, I'll let you start on some important takeaways that you have.
Important takeaway, definitely network to find the hidden job market, research the prospective employers, the field, and strategize.
Great, thank you. And Dan, how about your takeaways?
It's kind of it's sort of along the lines of what I was saying before, and a little bit I think hard to really apply, but it's a mindset that you really want to always be viewing things through the other person's eyes who you're asking, whether it's for advice or a position or an interview, and really stopping for a second and saying, what's going on in this person's world right now? How busy are they? How can I best make an impression on them? What are they going to think when they get this cover letter or resume, and how can I make it easier for them in terms of me providing support to them? And always stopping yourself and reviewing things through that viewpoint, I think, can make a big difference.
Great. Well, thank you guys so much. Now, everyone, as I told you, we have received a number of fantastic questions, and unfortunately, we don't have time to cover them all in the hour, but we do want to get this information to you. So please keep an eye on our website. We will be coming back and answering many more of these questions. I hope that we've been able to cover a lot of the basics and given you a good starting point. I'm just going to point out a couple of upcoming programs that the ABA has. Speaking the Language of the Client on October 9th, Networking Your Way to Success on November 13th, and Enhancing Your Online Presence on December 11th. And I also just want to ask that all of you stay on the line so that you can fill out a very quick evaluation survey. We'd love to hear your thoughts. And as mentioned at the top of the program, we've included some fantastic course materials from both Dan and Stephanie. So do take a look at the materials, and please keep an eye on our website. And thank you so much for joining us.